person who wants to live on a Bitcoin standard being able to do that, even if the merchants don't accept Bitcoin, I think that's also a really cool new development in the space. It's kind of like the approach to when Uber became a thing. So like Uber didn't really have all the proper licenses to do what they were doing. They just did it. And then all of a sudden regulation was like, okay, yeah, Uber can exist. Not only covering the White House, but also, when I interview people from the administration, bringing up concerns with the Bitcoin community, making sure that they sort of understand where we're coming from, what we're hoping from. And when I interviewed him, I said, are you aware that the regulation we create here will be spread globally, and that if we get things wrong around like having to KYC wallets and all this kind of stuff, that could really hurt a lot of people around the world who really need that anonymity? And he's like, yes, we do consider these things. I think the bigger thing that's happening right now is just this re-engagement with the political process, or at least the process of turning a bill into law, the legislative process. People are like learning how government works again because they really care about something that's now being legislated on.
For the few people that still don't know you, who are you? Why are you excited about Bitcoin?
Yeah, I am the political/White House correspondent for Bitcoin Magazine, which is kind of a surreal thing to say out loud. It's been a few weeks now since we got our hard pass to the White House to cover the administration as what they do pertaining to Bitcoin. I used to contribute to Forbes Digital Assets a little bit. I'll probably still do that here and there. But my main priority is just getting much better at this political beat. Obviously, not only covering the White House, but also, when I interview people from the administration, bringing up concerns with the Bitcoin community, making sure that they sort of understand where we're coming from, what we're hoping from, what we're hoping for from the administration, and hoping to sort of represent this idea of like a Bitcoiner in the White House asking questions well.
What is, for a complete politic, especially American politic newbie, what is a hard pass? What does this even mean?
Good question. Very good question. So there have been a few events that I attended at the White House since Trump has come into office. One was the Crypto Summit, which was like many different members of government, high-ranking officials, members of the administration, cabinet, chair of the CFTC, SEC, etc., many of the agency chairs, on one side of the table, and on the other side of the table, and I say it's like a literal table, was, Brian Armstrong from Coinbase, the Winklevi twins, Michael Saylor, David Bailey. So it was just meeting of sort of like the government and the broader crypto industry. So I was there for that, and that was sort of, they give you a soft pass, like a one-time pass. I think it's also, I wouldn't call it a test, but it's sort of like, it's not a guarantee that you're coming back to do another one of those events. So, I covered it, did it, whatever. They reached out to me and invited me back for Trump's, it was his first 100 days in office, to speak with some members of the administration. That ended up going really well. They were happy with it. And so, we had been in touch with their team, and they were like, yeah, these are the dates where you can apply for a hard pass, which means now when I want to go to some sort of briefing at the White House, I can go to the White House, swipe my pass, type in my PIN code, and walk in without having to go through a security clearance or anything, the way I would do if I was just being invited on like a per event basis.
Interesting. That's really cool. It's surreal that you are in the White House and we really have like Bitcoiners now at the epicenter of American politics. How has it been for you to have this surreal experience?
I think it's massively exciting. I have if I'm being completely honest, my anxieties around it, not anxieties, but like, you want to do the job well. And you're also speaking with some of the most powerful people in the world. So it's much different than other conversations that I've had up until this point. So it's just trying to do the job as best I can. But I think it's a really exciting time. I know that Bitcoin is the separation of money and state. I'm well aware of that. People remind me on Twitter and in DMs all the time, and why am I such a status cuck and all that kind of stuff. And I get that, but it doesn't, that's like saying that, gold is also kind of, I wouldn't call it like the separation of money and state, but it's an entity that the state doesn't necessarily control. You could argue that maybe the state sort of controls the price of it because there's so much paper gold traded, but they don't control what gold is. It's existed since far before the US government. so my point with that is just that it was inevitable that the United States was going to have something to say about Bitcoin. And my thoughts about this is it's better to have someone like myself, and it's not just me, there's some other reporters as well there who understand, well, they're covering more of the broader crypto space. I'm more of the Bitcoin only person. But I'd rather us be at the table and to talk about the concerns that we have when it comes to regulation, policy, to hold people accountable. And it's a responsibility that I'm excited to take on, honored, grateful for the opportunity to do. And I just sort of hope to do the best by, my own sort of high journalistic standards for myself, but also to sort of make the community, Bitcoin community globally, feel like they have somebody who they trust speaking with these people, speaking with those in power in the United States government.
Interesting. I love that. I wish I would have already recorded that, but I asked you because I was not sure actually if they give you any like questions to ask, or if they say like, oh, you cannot touch on those questions, and like just please repeat your answer.
Yeah, no, it was amazing. We were talking a little bit off camera. So when I was invited for Trump's 100 days, there was a few really cool things to note, and this is. It's not me shilling for the Trump administration. I just think these are actually genuinely cool things when it comes to the government being open to people coming in. And the first is that the Trump administration focused on having new media in the White House for the week celebrating the first 100 days or commemorating the first 100 days. So new media just means non-mainstream media. So I'm there speaking with Bo Hines, Howard Lutnick. The guy next to me is like a podcast from, I don't know, Pennsylvania, a state in the United States, small podcast. And he's talking with whoever he's speaking with in the government. And there was this real vibe of like, it's like the people's house. And it was like people were allowed to come in. And to the question that you asked more specifically, there was no screening of questions. I got to sit down with the Secretary of Commerce, with Bo Hines, who has like the longest title ever, but he's like an advisor to the president or the White House on digital assets. Got to ask them whatever questions I wanted. They responded. There were two or three what I would consider pretty hardball questions that I asked. Some of them about strategic reserve, where the keys are. Some of them about mining centralization and potential censorship. And they responded to them. And you have to commend them for that. One, inviting new media into the White House to have these discussions, and two, letting new media ask the questions that they want to ask.
This is something new that the White House is doing, right? Like those things were not happening before.
No, there was. I think I don't know how far back we can go, but I mean, when I was younger, early 2000s, even, it's like new media wasn't as much of a thing. Podcasting, having a YouTube channel, that wasn't even as much of a thing. It definitely wasn't happening under the Biden administration. It was very much mainstream media in there doing status quo type reporting. Under the first Trump administration, I don't think that was the case either. It just seems like I think what Trump really understood in this election is now what the power of new media, of non-mainstream media in the United States, and how big that reach is. I would say the biggest example of that is like Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan, I think, has more listeners than every mainstream media channel at this point. But even beyond that, just you can go down the list of other bigger podcasters, Lex Friedman, other people who have big podcasts. And it's like, if you do a handful of those podcasts, as Trump did, you're going to reach millions and millions of Americans, especially millions of Americans who feel probably like they're tired of the mainstream media. They feel politically disenfranchised, most of them. So you're speaking to people who otherwise are not, you're speaking to people who otherwise are probably tuning out a lot of what's happening in mainstream media. And it was funny. I was at an event, a Coinbase event yesterday, their State of Crypto Summit, and one of Trump's campaign advisors spoke at the event, and he said something really simple but very profound. He just said, campaigns should be additive. We should be adding new people that we're reaching, essentially. And they talked about, one, the crypto voter as that. I'm not saying that because I'm shilling crypto more broadly. That's just the language they were using. I read about Bitcoin, just for the record. So they were saying like, yeah, we just noticed that like nobody was taking the crypto voting block seriously. So we did. And I think they acknowledged that like there's a lot of people listening to alternative media. And so we're going to reach out to them as well. It really wasn't brain surgery to, I think, most people who were paying attention. I think Trump just chose to capitalize on it, and it worked it served him well. It worked to his benefit.
Yeah, I think Obama was the one that first really embraced as a presidential candidate social media, and
Yep.
Trump really embraced long form podcast. I mean, Joe Rogan is an obvious one for him to go, but for him also to go on Adin Ross live streams, you probably have seen that, and to TU1 talking about trucks. That's a whole new era of independent people. Just like, of course, those people have massive followings and they're extremely influential. They feel like everyday people, but like they are massive. They have a huge influence on voters. And Trump going there and acknowledging what power they have and the power shift between like mainstream media and independent content creators. I think that alone has nothing to do with really with Bitcoin, but this alone has been massive to see for me.
100%. And I think I'm going to use this word without negative connotation. So if you use the word opportunist in English, it's usually sort of like you're calling someone like, oh, you'll just take advantage of any opportunity. But I'm using it in the literal sense of the word. I think Trump is an opportunist and that he just looks for opportunities. And especially if the opposition isn't capitalizing on them, he does. And I think he absolutely knocked it out of the park. I think especially, the new media thing for sure, the long form podcast, that was great. But I went out to cover some of the Stand with Crypto events, which was like an organization that Coinbase was kind of behind. But I went out to some of the swing states. So for those listening who aren't familiar with US politics, there's like 6 or 7 states where they can flip either Democrat or Republican, left or right. And usually the election essentially hinges on those states. And what Coinbase did, which was quite brilliant, is they looked at the statistics of the voters in those areas and they compared the amount of crypto holders to the vote differential between Biden and Trump in 2020, which means like in most places, the vote differential between the two of them was maybe 10 to 20,000 people, but there was like 100,000 people holding crypto. So you had literally almost 10 times the amount of people holding crypto than the difference in votes in 2020 in the previous election, which means you only needed like 11-12% of those holders to be single issue voters, and Trump wins, and he won every single swing state. So you could argue that crypto is the thing that flipped this election. And then when you couple that with the fact that Trump was appealing to sort of the new media listeners, the long form podcasters, it was almost like a no-brainer. It's almost not surprising at all that he ended up winning the election because he just appealed to all those people that were either, the way his advisor put it, they said, the young people in the space, the Bitcoin and crypto space, are politically competitive, meaning they're not just going to vote Democrat or Republican. They want to hear that a candidate has an actual stance on this thing that they care very much about. And he crushed it. He knocked it out of the park in that regard.
I see that very much. I'm like in Austria, in Europe in general, there's like more parties. So I can select between 5 that probably have the chance to get into the parliament. And I have selected 4 out of the 5 in my young voting career.
Okay.
Yeah, it's like there's only one party that I haven't voted for in many different things. So, and I see that a lot with young voters where like, oh, like this election, this one, this election, this one. They really try to feel like, what is important for me and what is kind of the thing that is best represented right now, which is amazing to see, I feel like. And also in the election, there are more Bitcoin holders or people that have exposure to Bitcoin than dog owners. Was an interesting solution. Like, oh, like if you're against Bitcoin, you're almost like, oh, like, let's kill the dogs.
It was something along those lines. I think what the Democrats really learned is like there's no value in having an anti-Bitcoin, you could say broader, like an anti-crypto stance. Like there's no political, unless you're in like a securely, we call them blue states, the Democratic states, like Elizabeth Warren is in Massachusetts. She's not going to lose that seat. It's very, very Democrat. It's going to be very hard to sway it. So unless you're in that place and you could sort of just not care about the issue and throw it away, it's like, okay, maybe if you're her, but to almost most other politicians, you have to have a stance on this now. You have to have some sort of stance. And I think with what Stand with Crypto is doing in terms of like giving politicians ratings, making it easier for people to just say like, oh, who's this person I'm voting for? What do they think about this? And then they could look up different articles where they're cited or different quotes from these politicians. It's a really healthy thing, I think, for politics because the two-party system people tend to stagnate. The politicians get lazy because they sort of think, okay, these are the issues and this is how the people are going to vote. And so they don't really have to get creative in their approach to things, or they don't have to think too much about things. Whereas with what's happening now with Bitcoin and crypto is like, it's forcing politicians, I think, outside of a comfort zone and making them learn about something that otherwise before this, they could sort of afford to just say like, I don't need to do that. It's this election made it very clear that that's done. You have to have a Bitcoin stance at this point. You have to, demonstrate to the electorate that you understand the technology and that you're either pro or against it.
Have you learned something new about politics since you have been so close? Partially
being close, that's taught me a lot. But yesterday I had lunch with Julian Farrer, who is the creator of BitcoinLaws.io. I don't know if you've been seeing that Twitter account, Bitcoin Laws, but they're connected to different APIs at the state level and the federal level. And so they're doing all of these updates for what's happening with Bitcoin related bills going through different state level houses, senates, all this kind of stuff. And I feel like what's really exciting is what's happening is like a reinvigoration of the civics process. Me and Julian were talking about this, meaning people are like learning how government works again because they really care about something that's now being legislated on. So like generally speaking, people get how a bill is put together and passes through the House and goes through the Senate. But there's a lot of nuance in that as well. There's a lot of processes that are like there's a whole process of voting on amendments to a bill. So it's like a sub process of that process of voting on an actual bill. And I'm not even going to lie, I didn't know about all these processes at the federal level or the state level. So some of what I've learned, yes, there's been some things that I've learned from being closer to it, being upfront, speaking with politicians, people in the White House. But I think the bigger thing that's happening right now is just this re-engagement with the political process, or at least the process of turning a bill into law, the legislative process. And I think this is a very, very good thing. Like even Julian has been surprised as to how much people have taken to Bitcoin Laws and how much he sees it as sort of a teachable moment to say like, you know what, it's really important that people get, how these systems work. But it's like anything else. If you don't have a good reason, if it's not personal to you, it's just going to feel like another lesson in school. Like, oh yeah, and then you do this, and then you memorize it for like a quiz, and you pass a test on it, and you forget about it. But if you really care about the right to hold your private keys, or whether or not your state is going to have a strategic Bitcoin reserve, if these things matter to you, you're going to figure out how that gets done. And I think not only that, we saw this a lot with a bill. It was called the Blockchain Regulatory Certainty Act, and it would create a situation where non-custodial developers and service providers on blockchains across the board, they would not be treated as money transmitters. And this is a big issue right now in the Samurai Wallet case and the Tornado Cash wallet, in the Tornado Cash case. So people are now really paying attention to this, at least like hardcore enthusiasts. So a lot of people, it turned out, ended up calling their federal Congress people and senators to say like, this bill means a lot to me. What happened was that bill ended up, because it became a priority, it ended up getting the language, the really important language from that bill ended up getting merged into another bill, the Clarity Act, which is currently working its way through the House of Representatives right now in the United States. And I actually didn't know that that's how things worked. I learned that as I watched this go on. I was like, oh, you could just sort of say like, oh, we'll just take this language, plug it into this bill and do this. I kind of knew that, but I had never really paid attention to the process up close. And so it's been this really cool thing where, I mean, the biggest thing that I've taken away from what I'm doing is it's really important to not view government as being monolithic, which meaning that it's just this big thing that's impenetrable and that nobody has any say in. The biggest thing that has me excited right now is like, we do have a say. We know that the president of the United States is listening. We know that senators and Congress people are listening. We know that states are taking real action. Beyond that, though, one of the really cool things is also there are hardcore Bitcoiners at the federal level of government. Like I interviewed one of our Congress people, Nick Begich, who introduced the Bitcoin Act, which was originally introduced by Senator Lummis in the U.S. Senate. He introduced it to the House, like a sister act, a different, similar version of the act. But that act would codify into law the right for the United States government to create a strategic Bitcoin reserve. And more importantly, in my opinion, the right for Americans to hold their private keys so that the government can never seize private keys or issue some sort of order to take people's Bitcoin. And that guy, Nick Begich, who introduced it, I saw him speak at a Bitcoin Policy Institute event, and I was like, I kind of feel like this guy's a real one. Like, this guy seems like he actually like really cares about Bitcoin. So I went on his website, emailed his press secretary, and was like, hey, could I interview him? Turns out he's been buying Bitcoin on Mt. Gox since 2012. And it's like, he's a old school Bitcoiner. He actually even knows the pain. I think he bought $5,000 worth of Bitcoin on Mt. Gox for his company. He didn't take that Bitcoin off the exchange, so he lost it. I think at that time, Bitcoin cost like $12. So $5,000 worth was a pretty big buy. It was a lot of Bitcoin at the time. But you have someone here who's, he said to me in this interview, he said, I asked him personally why he thought Bitcoin was important. He's like, well, if the fiat system collapses, the government has to have some if this is what we're moving on to. And I'm just like, that wasn't on my bingo card. Like, that wasn't what I was expecting. You know what I mean? So I think understanding that the people you're dealing with are human beings, and some of them actually have the same passions around Bitcoin that you do. And some of them also truly understand the strategic importance of Bitcoin. Like, personally, the SPR doesn't excite me that much, but I don't want Russia or China accumulating more Bitcoin than the United States. Like, I don't think the United States should just start printing money to buy as much Bitcoin as possible. But it's the best way I've heard it put. The director or one of the co-founders of the Bitcoin Policy Institute, David Zell, said it in a very sort of mild-mannered way. He was like, I think it's prudent for the United States to have some Bitcoin. And it's like, that's how I feel about it as well. But knowing that we can have an impact on that, and knowing that the government gets that, like, the Bitcoin/crypto voter is a real voting block at this point, that's been a really cool experience to see up close.
Yeah, it's we often as human beings just try to like, hey, there's those people that make that decisions. Like, it's not that easy. It's like there's a process, and things can really fast happen if they don't do a good job, and impeachments and like political things can come very quickly if things get out of hand. So and they're all aware of that, especially now with new media and things spread like wildfire on Twitter and on all those platforms. I think sometimes people underestimate the influence they actually have on matters and take power away from themselves, and it's a sad thing because if you say like, oh, like we cannot do anything with politics, we have to, then you're giving them all the power anyways, 100%. Whoever them are. But that's a major learning from politics. How satisfied and how much do you like where the current Trump administration has been moving in Bitcoin, and kind of what their understanding also of Bitcoin currently is?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say in terms of understanding, so I interviewed Trump briefly before he became president at PubKey, when he went to PubKey, which is a Bitcoin bar in New York, to make a Lightning payment. He bought $900 worth of burgers at PubKey in Bitcoin. It was quite a moment to be there for. It's quite surreal. And I interviewed him, and I think he gets it. He gets how important it is to people. I would say next, in terms of his family, I interviewed his son, Don Jr., as well, and I think he gets it as well. But out of all of them, I think Eric Trump actually has a real understanding of, like, especially with Bitcoin, like Bitcoin as property. He said it. I interviewed him in Abu Dhabi, actually, at the MENA conference, and he said something along the lines of, like, my family's in property, and, we're well known for that or whatever, but like Bitcoin is kind of property for people who can't afford to invest in buildings and this and that. Like, it's something that they can own. And I was like, I don't know whether that was just Michael Saylor giving him talking points or whoever taught him about it, but I'm like, that's fine. Like, I'll take it. And if you're the one talking to your dad about this and explaining the importance of it, awesome. That's great. And some of the other stuff, I think I share some of the same, like, not a big fan of the meme coin stuff and the other stuff happening more broadly with crypto, but it's not, one, it's like a Bitcoin magazine. We don't really cover this. Two, it doesn't mean that much to me. My concerns right now predominantly lie with what happens with the Samurai case. And, as an extension of the Trump administration, or part of it, the Deputy Attorney General, Todd Blanche, issued a memo on April 7th saying that the Trump administration is no longer going to go after open source developers who make tools like crypto mixers. And that, to me, is like, it's a lesser told side of the story of the Trump administration, but a really important side of the story. So, the bigger side is like, the U.S. is going to make an SPR and the U.S. likes Bitcoin and all that. It's like, okay, that's fine. Like, all that stuff is good, well and good. Make an SPR if you want to. That's all good. But the bigger thing is, like, if we can't self-custody our Bitcoin and use it privately. And if people can't provide non-custodial services without getting money transmitter licenses, or if like every wallet turns into a money transmitter and we have to KYC every wallet, then we've lost so much ground. And from what I've seen from the administration, that's not happening. But I've been trying to actually schedule an interview with the Deputy Attorney General. There's certain things with the way the judicial system works in the United States where there's certain like districts around the United States, and one of the most powerful districts is the Southern District of New York. This is where like the Epstein case was tried, Sam Bankman-Fried case was tried, and that's where the Samurai case is being tried, and the Tornado Cash case. So it's where the P. Diddy trial is happening. It's where a lot of the big trials happen. There's a bit of an issue right now, though, where that is technically, they should answer to the federal government, but the Southern District of New York, sometimes people jokingly call them the Sovereign District of New York, meaning like they just do their own thing. And so what I'm watching right now is whether or not the Deputy Attorney General who created this memo, published this memo saying we're not going to go after these developers, actually steps in to say to the SDNY, like, stop. It's like the Samurai stuff in particular, the fact that they're still being tried as money transmitters while we're trying to pass bills that say this should not be a thing if someone's providing a non-custodial service. I know this isn't a popular thing to say, but like if they were actually involved in like money laundering, they should be tried on that. Like I know people in the community will get mad at me, but like I don't advocate for money laundering. I'm not pro that, but it does not seem that there is any legal grounds for them to be tried on this money transmission thing. And if that legal precedent is set by court case, it's going to have a huge effect on the rest of the industry. So I'm sort of hoping that Trump's, appointed Deputy Attorney General follows through and does sort of say like, hey, I issued this memo, stop playing around, stop charging people based on this kind of stuff when we said we're not going to do that anymore. This is sort of a remnant of the Biden administration, their whole regulation by enforcement approach, meaning where the laws were sort of gray or unclear, they were just like, okay, go for it. Let's just prosecute someone and go after them. And luckily that has stopped under Trump. There's been a lot less there's still some, but there's been a lot less debanking, the stuff that was happening under Choke Point 2.0. So there's a lot of good stuff happening. The bigger thing that we need to see, though, is it's fine for Trump's deputy AG to like issue a memo. It's fine for Trump to sign an executive order saying Americans can hold their private keys, but this kind of stuff can be reversed very easily. You need the stuff to be codified into law for it to be something that Americans can feel secure, like that those rights will be protected. I think we're getting there. Democrats are using the meme coin or the fact that Trump's family has issued like a stable coin. They're using that against him, which I think is, if they want to bring it up, I get it. It's politics. That's fine. But I think it's also a little unfair in that like they're not really addressing the heart of the matter of these bills, which is like the right for Americans to be self-sovereign and to have privacy in transactions. And again, though, like I won't won't get too into the weeds with it, but I've also spoken with a number of the Congress people who are chairing these hearings, and these are also like longtime Bitcoin holders who really believe in the technology. So there's people who really care about this as politicians, but also as Bitcoin holders working on it. And I just hope that we see stuff codified into law. But there has been a lot of promising developments based on what Trump can do, what's within his power, jurisdiction, all that kind of stuff. It's at least setting a message that we're not just going to, by default, criminalize this technology.
And I think this is a very good, there's actually two very important points for me in there, to let the people do what people want to do with their Bitcoin. I mean, he said it jokingly, like play with your Bitcoin, something like that.
Playing with your Bitcoin and your crypto, yeah.
But honestly, that's what politics should be there. Like you should have a frame, and you should let people play with their Bitcoin.
That's it.
And the second thing that I really like and see as a win for Bitcoin, that they really take it seriously and that they actually listen. And I mean, the president coming to Bitcoin conference, the vice president coming to a Bitcoin conference, so many high up politicians. I think that's an overall win for Bitcoin. I mean, of course, there are a lot of people that just don't like politics, but if you like Bitcoin, it was inevitable that like politics will care about Bitcoin because it represents voters.
Totally.
But it's really great to see that we are already at that point where politics can no longer ignore Bitcoin. It's too big and too important for the country.
I agree 100%. And also in regards to the politicians that spoke at the event, one, there were 500 speakers at Bitcoin 2025. There were maybe 10 politicians who spoke. So like when people are like, it was all politicians, it's like, like on the YouTube cards that we put out for the live stream, sure, there were some politicians on it. But for the most part, it was like, I think at most it was like 3% of the speakers were politicians. It was a very, very small percentage. It wasn't that big. But honestly, like the way I look at that is I would rather those conversations be happening in front of 10,000 people on a huge stage and be filmed than be happening in back rooms with people who we don't know and who are making decisions for us, or at least having conversations on our behalf without us seeing that. I'm not saying that still doesn't go on. I'm sure it does. But at least we can now point to evidence, a video of saying, hey, we invited you to this conference. You came and spoke about it. You said this. Why aren't you fulfilling that promise? It at least puts people on the record in front of a huge audience. 10,000, there's 30,000 people at the conference plus, 100 and whatever thousand people watching at any given time on the live stream. So it's like, I like bringing sunlight to things. I like shedding light on things and then like really getting a sense of like where people are at. And there was even some critique of like, well, some of these politicians might just be jumping on the Bitcoin bandwagon because it's a popular thing right now. Fine. Like that honestly, like that doesn't bother me. Like I would rather them, because what often happens, it's like the equivalent of people who initially get into Bitcoin for number go up, right? They're like, oh, I'm going to get rich. Great. Like, let's go. Let's sign me up. It's like politicians. I'm going to get votes. Great. Sign me up. But inevitably, thanks in part to the work that the Bitcoin Policy Institute does, there are, more than a handful of prominent politicians who end up getting it, who end up really, really like being like, oh, okay, that's what Bitcoin is. Like, got it. I get why that's important for people to have, for the United States to have some on their balance sheet. So, yeah, I mean, of course there's going to be, politicians want votes. Of course there's going to be some that come to it for that reason. I would just say maybe keep a little bit more of an open mind of like, it doesn't mean that they don't care. I was with Senator Lummis at PubKey. She did a talk to maybe 40, 50 people there. That's not like, you wouldn't do that. Something that has like that, the optics are sort of so low. Yeah, there were some people taking pictures, but you wouldn't go out of your way to speak to such small groups of people if you didn't genuinely care about this stuff. That's my humble opinion. I could have a biased viewpoint, but
also Trump coming to the PubKey, like he could have chosen so much bigger stages, honestly.
Totally.
And also, like, just one thing, being ignored is probably the worst thing that can happen to Bitcoin if nobody cares all of a sudden. And thankfully, in the last 16 years, it was very hard to ignore Bitcoin because of the success. And now it's also getting really hard to ignore it. How do you actually look at the strategic Bitcoin reserve? You mentioned it one or two times now in the podcast. It has now, for me, it's just now, okay, we had those Bitcoin already. Now they put a different label on it, which in politics, words do really matter, like how people call it. But what do you expect beyond that? Is there something that you like kind of expect with that?
Yeah, I'm not cheering for a strategic Bitcoin reserve so that the government can pump my bags. And I say that wholeheartedly. I actually don't think it's fair to the average American who might not like Bitcoin for the government to start spending money acquiring or printing money to acquire it. So I don't think the government should go out of its way to acquire whatever some politicians have proposed, like 1 million Bitcoin or something. I have very, very mixed feelings about that. But if in fact, and we're still waiting on the audit for the Bitcoin we have, we still don't know if the United States government has that Bitcoin or how much we have. If in fact we do have, 90, 100,000 Bitcoin or whatever the number is, I wouldn't sell it. Like we could hold on to that. if they come up with other ways to acquire it, I don't know what those ways would be. They call it budget neutral ways, which means they're not going to print money or tax, I don't know, whatever, spend money to get it. I'm keeping an open mind. Someone like Andrew Hones has suggested bit bonds, so issuing bonds where 90% of the money goes to government expenses, but 10% of the money goes to acquiring Bitcoin for a strategic Bitcoin reserve. That sounds like a creative thing. I don't know whether Secretary Bessent, the Secretary of the Treasury, is ready to go for that, but maybe 2 or 3 years from now, he will be. I don't know. If he's not currently ready, maybe he just needs to maybe he needs to see it happen on like a state or a city level first, and then he'll think about applying it at the federal level. This is often how the United States works too. The states are kind of like laboratories for the federal government. So you sort of see what works on the state level, and then you maybe apply it on the broader level at the federal level. So it's fine. I think the United States should have a Bitcoin reserve. That's great. It's not the most exciting part of my story. I mean, before all this, I was covering Bitcoin adoption in Latin America, Africa. Like, I love that side of things. And as a quick aside, for people who think that I've stopped caring about that, I very much care about that. And it's part of the reason I do the work I do with the U.S. government, because the legislation that we pass here realistically will be copied and pasted globally. Like, versions of it will be sort of used globally. And I think the United States getting it right will send a positive message to the rest of the world regarding this technology. So that's my tangent. But coming back, SBR, the government should have some Bitcoin the same way we have strategic oil reserves or gold reserves. I do not think they should go out of their way to acquire a ton of it, because I also think there's more and more people who hold Bitcoin in the United States, but it's still a relatively small percentage. I think at best it's maybe 35%. So it becomes sort of, you have to have a political calculation at that point. Do you want to do something that 65 to 70% of the country might not really care about? Do you want to spend your political capital doing something like that, establishing something that most of the country doesn't really get or care about? My thoughts are like, you can do it. I just wouldn't make it a priority for the administration, or at least you can make establishing the reserve a priority, but acquiring the Bitcoin at like a crazy rate, I just don't think. I might be wrong about this. I don't know. For me, I just sort of feel like it's a bit unfair to the Americans who might not care that this much about this particular topic.
The first time I ever made any money, I got myself from that money a watch. And ever since then, I collect timepieces to remember times where I achieved some milestone. That's why I got the Bitcoin 2025 edition when I went to my first ever American Bitcoin conference. So for me, the Bitcoin watches from CoinVigilante represents the time that we are living in. For every person that wears a Bitcoin watch, I know they are representing sound money to the outside world. Make sure to check out those amazing CoinVigilante timepieces down in the descriptions. I love those watches so much. The most important thing for your Bitcoin journey is not buying Bitcoin, but it's how to keep them. And yes, you have maybe the right tools, but how do you actually go ahead and stick it all together so it's the most secure for you personally? Self-custody is a deeply personalized journey, and the Bitcoin way is helping you exactly finding that correct setup for you personally. They are also helping you with securing your own cybersecurity. And if you want to go one step above all that, you can even get a consultation for a Plan B residency. Go to thebitcoinway.com/Robin and you will get a 30-minute free consultation. I know how big of a hurdle it can be to have self-custody, but it's so freaking important to make that first step. We have to make sure it's as easy and simple as possible. And that's exactly what Bitbox did. Bitbox created the simplest and the easiest hardware wallet to use to get into self-custody. So get yourself a Bitbox down from the link in the description. And when you use code Robin, you even get a 5% discount. It's also I just from a I don't want governments to own Bitcoin. I want people to own Bitcoin. Like, just from a mindset perspective, but at the same time, if I see other governments adopting Bitcoin, I don't want I don't want to be in a jurisdiction that doesn't do that.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting game theory where you're like, oh, I actually don't want governments to buy it, but if other governments start it, I really don't want my government to be left out. So it's like I'm torn apart between those two realities.
Yeah, and I think that's a really amazing point. I'm glad you brought it up. A friend of mine put this really, really well. You know, there's people in the Bitcoin space that just believe in like pure anarchy, elimination of the state, and all that, and everybody's entitled to their opinions. That's totally fine. I don't believe in that. I'm a political independent. I vote sometimes to the left, sometimes to the right. I vote based on issues mostly, but I come from the world of like public education, social work, like. I don't like the elimination of the state as we know it overnight would hurt so many people that I don't think people really want that. I'm down for the state having less authority, but I'm also like, there are certain people who work for their pensions, and if the government holding some Bitcoin will eventually sort of help some of those pensions get paid out because now their pension fund is more solvent because they have the best performing asset of the last 16 years, then I think that's fine. But you have to look at this stuff with nuance, as you just said. Like, I don't think government should have none, but I don't think any government should be trying to acquire all of it. I just think it's going to be like anything else. Yeah, like you should have some. Germany shouldn't have sold 50,000 Bitcoin. Like that wasn't a smart move, in my very humble opinion. You know,
there's a website how much they
lost.
I mean, there's so many things in there. I want a small tangent. Do you, and maybe there's already something on the way I've not researched, is there something coming along where they incentivize using Bitcoin as a medium of exchange, like getting it tax-free under like $1,000 or something like that?
Yep. Yeah, so from what I've heard, there's two things. In 2023, this one is not just what I heard. I've actually looked at the bill. Senator Lummis and Senator Gillibrand put together a bill. I forget what it's called. It's like I'm not going to say. It's like the Digital Assets Responsibility Act. I don't know, something like that. It doesn't really matter. But in that bill, they allowed for de minimis spending of $200, which means that if you spend under $200 worth of Bitcoin, you do not need to pay capital gains taxes on that. What they're now proposing, what they're saying they want to include in a future bill, is upping that number from $200 to $600. I think that's a great start. If I can spend Bitcoin, because it's not only about can I spend my Bitcoin, it's now will more people accept it because other people can spend it without paying. It's like, will more shops start accepting it because now people can spend it. So it's not so much about my personal preference as to whether or not I want to spend it or not. It's about where can I spend it? What places, can I, for me, it legitimizes it as a medium of exchange. Even if you're only saying $600, you're saying that Bitcoin is money at that point. Not that it's just capital or like pristine collateral or something like that. You're saying like, this is money. It's capital and pristine collateral as well, but it's money. And so I think Lummis gets that, and hat tip to Gillibrand, who's a Democrat, one of the few Democrats who I think really does get Bitcoin, or at least she says she gets it and tries and proposes good legislation around it. I don't know if we'll see that soon, but I at least like to see that, one, a bill has been introduced to the Senate that includes that sort of language, and that, two, at least publicly, Senator Lummis is talking about that de minimis exemption. I think it would be huge. I mean, I would love to be able to do small purchases on a daily basis with Bitcoin and to not have to think twice about calculating the capital gains taxes on that. I think we'd be in a good place if we started moving in that direction.
For me, as someone that now interviewed over 500 different Bitcoiners on this podcast, store of value, how should I say that? Store of value gets kind of boring for me. It's like Bitcoin has, for me, won that battle. Like, Bitcoin is the best asset. It's pristine collateral. Like there's no, all those comparisons of Bitcoin versus real estate, Bitcoin versus stocks. But yeah. It's a very boring argument at this point. It's like, it will outperform everything else. So the interesting thing now really is medium of exchange. How far can we push Bitcoin, and how fast can we push Bitcoin to actually be spent? 1 year ago, I haven't earned any, or maybe 1 year, let's say 40 months ago, I haven't earned anything directly in Bitcoin. Now I think 70 to 80% of my income is directly in Bitcoin. And I have like 3 freelancers and one of them accepts Bitcoin. So I pay them in Bitcoin directly. And this is really exciting once you really start using Bitcoin as money. And I'm just like 100% in there. So I really like, I'm cheering way more for governments to incentivize medium of exchange than just like buying it. And in that weird way, you're incentivizing Bitcoiners to come to that country and also to Bitcoin to flourish in the country. So you're getting indirectly more Bitcoin into the country. So I think that should be the strategic Bitcoin reserve, making medium of exchange and priority in the country.
Yeah, and I have mixed feelings about this, but even if like, one of the budget neutral ways they could acquire Bitcoin, I'm not saying this is what I would do with my Bitcoin, but they could say like, well, if you pay your taxes in Bitcoin or something, you don't have to pay your capital gains. There's still a benefit to the spender at that point, especially if you're a long time holder, to be able to pay with an asset that has appreciated over time, with money that has appreciated over time. The whole idea of like giving the government my Bitcoin, like that just sort of feels a little bit like counter the ethos of it. Like I'm not, again, everyone can do whatever they want, but at the same time, there would be a benefit for the consumer at that point. But I'd also like to point out there's a really cool trend happening globally. I just wrote this piece for the print magazine of Lightning apps that interface with traditional fiat systems, usually like mobile money systems. So like I'll give a shout out to Tando. I used this while I was in Kenya. I'll show you the interface for it. This is an app where no KYC, nothing. You connect it to one of your Lightning apps, and I don't get paid by Tando or anything, but this is what it looks like. So if you click send money, I used this while I was in Kenya. You type in someone's mobile number, and that's their M-Pesa account. M-Pesa is the mobile money system in Kenya. I'm not exactly sure how it works, but so essentially, I can't use M-Pesa if I don't have a Kenyan ID. But what I do on the back end, an app like this connects your Lightning wallet. You pay their Lightning node, and then the company settles the bill for you. It's kind of like Strike in the United States or like Bring in Europe. I don't know if you've heard of Bring In, but this idea of the person who wants to live on a Bitcoin standard being able to do that, even if the merchants don't accept Bitcoin, I think that's also a really cool new development in the space. And again, that might not be a legal thing, but that's at least more and more people showing that Bitcoin can be used as money to make everyday purchases. So I think there's going to be a combination of, I think it was Alex Gladstein who said everyone should go to Steak and Shake and buy some, burgers, whatever. Steak and Shake recently started accepting Bitcoin. Go there, make your Lightning payment, buy some burgers. And he said the law will follow people's behavior. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Like if people want to go to Steak and Shake and whatever, and there's enough people who want to do that, eventually the law will sort of catch up with that, at least in theory. And, then it's like, well, we should at least allow for people to make purchases like this with Bitcoin because people are obviously doing it. It's kind of like the approach to when Uber became a thing. So like Uber didn't really have all the proper licenses to do what they were doing. They just did it. And then all of a sudden regulation was like, okay, yeah, Uber can exist. That's good. So I think we sort of have to have the same mindset with Bitcoin. It's like, just do it, jump in and like show people that it's money, and then law will ideally or hopefully follow suit.
I use Bring In every month because I have to convert my Bitcoin to euros to get my fiat bills paid.
Oh, cool, nice.
If you earn more Bitcoin than fiat, but you spend less Bitcoin than fiat, then obviously you have to make a transaction there, and that's why. And I'm sometimes getting frustrated with that. Never sell your Bitcoin kind of ethos. And also this paying taxes in Bitcoin, I would do it in an instant.
Is that right?
Yeah, 100%. Because like, first of all, like if you pay them in euros versus Bitcoin, for me, it doesn't really make a difference because those euros could also be converted into Bitcoin. So it's
true.
You could also, so like, if you pay taxes, does it really matter like which one you use? And I rather use Bitcoin as a medium of exchange than euros. But maybe that's just me being fully on a Bitcoin standard.
Yeah.
I love always using more Bitcoin in more different ways than just having it as a store of value. But
Totally.
I'm also not a big fan of borrowing against the Bitcoin. There's a whole nother discussion. So I'm just like, I'm just trying to push Bitcoin to be money.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I think it's to each their own. Some people do like to borrow against it, and that's their strategy. I don't reserve any judgment there. It's just like everyone do your thing. Like it's freedom money. If that's how you want to use your freedom money to borrow, use it as collateral, great. I just think the one thing people should take note of is like if Bitcoin doesn't become money, or if it all becomes just paper Bitcoin and people are investing in ETFs and blah blah blah, like it fails. Like I'm not trying to scare anyone, but like if we don't actually like use it as money and those network effects don't actually get created, there's a high likelihood that it's either that or we just have a lot of JPEGs on the blockchain, making up for the transaction volume, because as the block reward reduces every 4 years, the miners are only going to plug in if there's transactions happening on the blockchain. Now, I'm not saying that like all of us are making our transactions on the base layer, but we need to be opening Lightning channels and doing stuff that costs fees on the base layer, and that's just a reality. So I think maybe we're not there yet. Maybe Bitcoin is still new to most of the world and most people are still treating it as a store of value. But I think what you're doing is important to show people that this is the case, because when they're ready, then they'll start spending it as money as well. I wouldn't say if, I'll say when they're ready, they'll come around and sort of see that side of the value of Bitcoin.
As you're now into, and you mentioned that you haven't lost touch with the things that you have done before, and you're getting now obviously a lot of questions around like politics and the White House. What is kind of questions you would like to get, as everyone is kind of focusing so much on the White House, Frank?
It's a great question. Yeah, I think I touched on it before, but why I chose to do this. And again, I've lived around the world, Venezuela, different parts of Africa, Asia, Europe. I think Bitcoin is going to be a lifeboat for the world. And I don't say that to scare people. I just think history shows us that all fiat currencies sort of disappear. What I've learned from, I think, interviewing predominantly Africans is like, they're like, what you guys do in either United States or Western Europe or something, like a lot of that ends up getting copied and pasted in Africa. And I've spoken with a lot of activists about this as well. And when the United States takes an antagonistic stance on something, like if the United States is against Bitcoin, it really harms, it has a chilling effect globally. It harms activists who really rely on this technology, people who are debanked. And I know people say, well, that's not really a thing, blah, blah, blah. I've been to plenty of circular economies. Like I was recently in Kibera in Kenya. Kibera is the largest informal settlement in Africa. Another name for an informal settlement is a slum. The people in that part of Kenya, a lot of them are refugees that can't get a national ID, so they need Bitcoin to interface with the digital economy. They use apps like Tando, which I just showed you, to interface with the digital economy in Kenya. So doing what I'm doing in the United States, I think people have the misperception that I'm doing it because I want like the United States to win and everybody else to lose or something. That's not why I'm doing it. I'm doing it because while one day I hope the reality changes and that countries come up with their own legislation and don't just copy the United States or Western Europe, I hope African governments come up with their own stuff, whatever works best for the situation on the ground there. That's not the current reality. And if we don't get this right, if we don't do stuff like codify the right to hold your private keys into law, then we're sort of sending a signal to the rest of the world that this isn't very important, and it is very important. So while I'll admit that politics is not my favorite thing to cover, I would much rather be like speaking with someone from Uganda and just sort of like learning about Uganda and whatever. I feel, I won't call it that I have a responsibility right now, but I've been given an opportunity to speak with people in power about why this is important to people around the world. And I'll give you evidence of that. I spoke with the former chairman of the CFTC. He was actually the person That's the Commodities and Futures Trading Association. He was actually the person who classified Bitcoin as a commodity in 2014 or 15 or something. His name is Tim Massad. And when I interviewed him, I said, are you aware that the regulation we create here will be spread globally, and that if we get things wrong around like having to KYC wallets and all this kind of stuff, that could really hurt a lot of people around the world who really need that anonymity? And he's like, yes, we do consider these things. I hope he was telling the truth. Part of me thinks, even if he wasn't, even if I was the person that said to him, hey, like, please understand that what you do as a U.S. lawmaker or chair of a regulatory body is going to have effects globally. To be able to say that to someone like that is a privilege, and I don't take it lightly. And I would like the world to know that I'm not just here advocating for the United States. I don't think the United States should acquire all the Bitcoin. Bitcoin is a neutral money for the world. It's a lifeboat for people. It's a lifeline for people who are cut off from traditional financial systems. And I think it inherently aligns with the American values of freedom and self-sovereignty. And I don't say that as like a flag-waving Republican. It's not like I'm not saying this to say like America, like eagles flying in the background and stuff. That's not my point. The point is that like there are a lot of benefits to freedom and being able to transact freely and to be able to be a part of a global financial system. And America should be on the right side of history when it comes to that. I won't say lead the way, because I think El Salvador is actually doing a better job, or has done a better job of that. And I'll tip my hat to what they're doing there. But we should be on the right side of history with this. And I want to be a part of hopefully nudging the government in that direction.
And I think you are probably the best person that I know of that does that job really well. So I thank you. I'm thankful that we have a real Bitcoin in there.
I appreciate it.
There could be. I just leave it at that.
No, I'll get a shout out if you don't mind. I'm going to shout out my boss, David Bailey. David, I mean, he's a funny guy. He gets shit on Twitter, blah, blah, blah. But like his job wasn't just sort of like getting Trump to understand Bitcoin. Once Trump got elected, he then had to be in the room with Brad Garlinghouse from Ripple and everybody else describing the difference to Trump between Bitcoin and everything else. Trump got that. He got it on the campaign trail and everything else. But like, I'll put it this way, and this isn't coming from David or anything. My impression is that he sometimes needs to be reminded of the difference. And David is the person who does that. And so David is a great spirit. He's like a kind of a happy-go-lucky person. But if I had to guess, it's not always easy to play that role. And I'm sure it's not the first thing he gets up wanting to do every day. I'm sure he does it because he understands the importance and the importance of doing this in this moment while we have a window to get certain things accomplished. And, the differentiation between Bitcoin and crypto is really a thing that needs to happen frequently. You even saw it like when Trump first announced the crypto reserve, the internet exploded and they were like, no crypto reserve, Bitcoin reserve, blah, blah, blah. And 5 days later, the executive order very specifically differentiated between Bitcoin and all other crypto assets. So this is stuff that goes on behind the scenes that people like David do. And it's really, really important work because, I mean, I don't want the US government investing in like XRP or Solana or something like that. Like, they can have their stockpile of whatever assets they confiscate, and ideally they sell those assets and turn them into Bitcoin. But the powers that be should very much know the difference. I think it's really important that that's the case.
And this is sometimes where I'm a little bit frustrated with Twitter because they're throwing shit at someone and not understanding the full picture. And I don't know. I noticed from my 1 year's small work here with the podcast, the thing you've seen on screen is like 20% of the whole thing that's going on. And with David Bailey, it's probably the thing you see is probably like just like 1%.
Totally.
That's actually going on. So I have a major respect for people that do a lot of the work and still get a lot of shit online in what we as a situations they are. Because it's easy to be a full hard maxi on the internet and don't fight with politics around Bitcoin, and like you get shit from politics and you get shit from Bitcoiners basically.
It's like a no-win situation, and I get that. But I think one of the things, like strategically, and I'll admit that it's part of my strategy, is like I would do it regardless, but I do think about it strategically as like I make sure with my coverage and with the privilege that I have to make sure that, okay, like, sure, I'm going to talk about politicians with the SBR and some of the bigger issues that they obviously want to talk about. And that's their talking points. They want to look good. They want to take their victory lap. Awesome. That's great. They deserve it. That's all good. But I am going to bring up, dangers of censorship, privacy, all this other stuff as well. And those are harder conversations to have. I was on Simply Bitcoin recently, and Nico talked about the first time he ever sat down with the senator, and he was ready to like go off, like, when are you going to end the Fed and this and that, blah, blah, blah. And he sat down in the room and he felt the gravity of the situation, and he felt the staff around him and everything else. And he was just like, yeah, you have to be strategic when you have these conversations. And I'm like, like, I'm glad that you understand what that feels like, because it's much different than running your mouth online. And not only that, the job of the U.S. government is not hyper Bitcoinization. It's to govern the United States, to preserve the dollar, all this stuff. Like, I can have my feelings about that, but like ignoring that that's reality is not going to help you when having a conversation with these people. So it's like, it's just like, it's funny because the whole Twitter strategy for most people is being the maxi, being the holier than thou, like, this is what I would do, blah, blah, blah. It's like my new sort of rule is like, especially if it's like a NIM, like a person who doesn't actually write under their own name on Twitter, whenever one of those people like suggests to me how to do something, when they don't do any actual reporting with people in person, when they don't write under their name, when it's just like, it literally doesn't even process in my mind. I will not even take that as like something for my mind to consider. It's just, I just completely ignore it at this point. Unless it's something where there's like a really good point being made. But when it's someone telling me like, this is how I would do it, or this is how you could do it better, it's like, dude or girl, like, no, like it's show me evidence of you doing it and I'll take notes. Like, until then, like, I'm not going to get everything perfect. I know that. I'm well aware of that. I'm a flawed individual. I feel anxiety in these moments like anybody else would. I'm not a sociopath. So it's like, I'm not going to do it perfectly, but I know that I can put my head on a pillow doing what I do, and that remains my sort of moral compass. Like, do I feel comfortable in my own skin doing this? Do I feel like I'm staying true to the values that I have as a Bitcoiner as I do this job? And the answer to that is wholeheartedly yes. So I have nothing that, I don't feel like I've done anything where it's worthy of such harsh critique that I'm totally sort of failing in the position or taking advantage of the position I have just for my own gain.
Showing one's proof of work is a huge thing. Like, okay, what have you done? Like, what is your proof of work? And I love talking about myself because I can talk down on myself. And I have changed. The first year in Bitcoin community, I was only on Twitter. And then came my podcast, and now I have the podcast for like 1.5 years. And I could make a whole podcast episode around what opinions I've changed while actually talking with all the Bitcoiners involved in the Bitcoin community. Your opinion, how should I say that? Your opinion grows up.
Yes, matures,
and gets more nuances and gets you get way more angles and perspectives on things, and you're not as hard. And that's coming from a guy that lives fully on Bitcoin, earns a Bitcoin, is working only with Bitcoin-only companies. Like, I would never get sponsored by any company that does anything else outside of Bitcoin. So like, but you really learn like, okay, there is my ideology, and then there's reality, and those two things never match.
And they shouldn't. I constantly write about this when it comes to something like stable coins. People who are like ideologically, yeah, it's not my thing. Bitcoin came out of the financial crisis of 2008-9 to be a competitor to the dollar, which was being devalued, all that stuff. But on a practical level, like I've lived in places where people would do anything to get dollars. Living in Venezuela during hyperinflation, a dollar was good enough hedge. And so on this practical level, it's just like, if that's what the market demands and this is what people want, I'm not going to tell them no. And so it's like, and you learn a lot of those lessons along the way. I think at the same time, though, just like you described, part of your ideology is not working with any companies that do anything with other than Bitcoin. That's important to you. And I think in a very realistic way, you figured out a way to incorporate that into your approach. You stay true to that. That's something that's within your control, and that's great. But it doesn't mean, my guess is that you'll still talk to people who might not take the same approach, meaning like you'll still have a conversation with them. And that's the difference, right? You can believe in what you believe in. You don't have to automatically classify someone as whether they're a shitcoiner or they're a whatever. They're less holy than you because of what they're doing. Now, there's gradients to that. If they're running around shilling some sort of meme coin or whatever, call them out. That's fine. Like, that's all good. But if they're just simply like, I mean, I used to think about this all the time with like Peter McCormack, who I like. What Bitcoin did, I watched like 1 million of those episodes when it was the popular Bitcoin podcast. And shout out to Danny. It's still a great podcast. But I mean, they're sponsored by Gemini. They have, they've worked with a bunch of companies that are otherwise like crypto companies or whatever. My thoughts with that is like, I don't care. It doesn't make Peter an evil human being. Like, it's just like, that's who we choose to do business with. Generally speaking, I think the Winklevi are fine, like if they want to be in crypto stuff, whatever. Like I just sort of ignore it. It's people, if people want to do that stuff, that's great. But I think getting rid of the judgmental mentality is the thing. It's good for you and it's good for the space. Like, do your thing. If someone's straight up shilling or scamming, obviously, like, just call that shit out. But otherwise, like, just lead by example. Like, do what's within your power to sort of like adhere to your ethos as strongly as possible without becoming an asshole, to be honest. So
yeah, like my thing is always when I look at people coming on the podcast, especially because now the podcast become a little bit bigger, so people are actually reaching out and like requesting to be on the podcast.
Yeah.
I look at like, are you scamming people? And I have to be very careful because people calling everything a scam these days. Like, if you're making money somehow, I guess you're a scam artist.
That's it.
But like, there's also actual scammers out there that really sell non-legit things. If you're not scamming people and you're an interesting person to talk to, like, well, let's have a conversation. And I probably disagree with almost every guest on something if I talk long enough with them. Yeah,
100%. And I think that thing about calling everything a scam, especially things that have found product market fit. If you're all about Bitcoin and Austrian economics, one of the core tenets of Austrian economics is that value is subjective. Also, one of the core tenets of Austrian economics, the market decides what has value. The market shows you what has value. I'm not going to lie. I actually watched Shane, what's his name, the creator of Polymarket. I saw him interviewed yesterday. Polymarket should have been created on Bitcoin. We were too busy calling everything else a scam and telling them that not to do this stuff. And in the meantime, he goes and builds it on whatever the chain is, Matic or Polygon or something, an ETH layer 2. That's a real product. Polymarket is a real product in the crypto world. Like, it has found product market fit. It's a real thing. So to just call everything in crypto a scam, now, like, is it Bitcoin? Of course it's not Bitcoin. It has almost nothing to do with Bitcoin. Like, it's that's not the point of it, though. So it's like what we've done. And I'll say we, because I've done that to some degree. I don't really do it publicly, but I very much encourage people to stay away from everything but Bitcoin. It's like, make your own decisions. But like, in terms of a long-term investment, because Polymarket exists, I would never say you should invest in Matic or whatever that token is. But it doesn't mean that the technology can't be used for other things. Is the technology, like I said, is that technology pristine collateral? Is it as special as Bitcoin? In my opinion, no. But again, that's just my opinion. Polymarket, I think, is actually one of the best sources of information these days. I think prediction markets are actually a really amazing source of information. And I think there's just too much getting lost now in like everything is a scam. Like, I don't love everything about a protocol like Aave, but also borrowing and lending on other crypto rails found a product market fit as well. So it's like, I'm not saying that they've done it perfectly on those things, but there's a Bitcoin project that I really like, and I'll shout them out. I've written about them, but Botanix. So Botanix is created by a guy who fully believes Bitcoin is money, blah, 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 but he believes that you will need to build a financial system on chain on top of Bitcoin. So Botanix transports the EVM, which is like the technology behind Ethereum, without ETH. So it literally takes the technology without ETH as the token. You would be able to use Bitcoin on Ethereum essentially. And he's looking to build prediction markets. He's looking to build borrowing and lending on his layer 2, all this stuff. I don't think that's a bad thing. I just, I think that innovation in this regard is fine. I just think, again, if you have someone else calling another crypto asset money, that's when things start to get a little bit like, Bitcoin is money. Everything else is sort of something else. And most of it is a scam. I'm not trying to be a dick there, but just like there's a lot of scams out there for sure, but not everything is. Like it is important to think in a bit more of a critical and nuanced way about this stuff.
It was amazing to see that Polymarket was more accurate than any polls in America. It's like, okay. And it was really because from a logical perspective, polls should be more accurate because they're trying to spread across different people, and Polymarket probably, I don't know the user base, but probably is younger male people betting on there. So it's not a very diverse group of people. Yeah. So it was interesting to see how much more accurate Polymarket was in the actual election than the polls. Really cool. We have one question that I asked each and every one of my returning guests, and the question is, what was your biggest learning since your last appearance on the podcast outside of Bitcoin?
Ooh, great question. It's better to make a decision than to sit on the fence. So sitting on the fence means just sort of saying like, should I do this? Should I not do this? Should I do it? Should I not do it? That will drive you crazier than making the wrong decision. Because if you make the wrong decision, you'll sort of just say, okay, I got it wrong. Let me stop and move on. And best case scenario, you make the right decision and good things start happening in your life. I say this in regard to accepting the position at the White House. I was very on the fence about it for a minute. I knew that in some ways I would have to be more careful with the things that I said. And I'm a musician. I make music. I've always been a creative person. So not being 100% expressive is difficult for me. But I'm happy I made a decision, and I can still be expressive. I can still do expressive things. It just doesn't have to be broadcast on Twitter or something else. But I'm glad that I made the decision because it feels like the privilege and the opportunity that I've been given, it feels very much like a once in a lifetime experience. And I didn't let fear of what the community might think of me, or maybe having to sort of censor myself in certain ways. And I'm not saying that like I don't say things that are important to me. I just, again, it's like I have to be a little bit more thoughtful about how I say things. I'm glad I didn't let that get in the way. And I'm glad that I made a decision and that I accepted it. Thus far, it has worked. And I will say too, if it feels like I end up sacrificing too much to do this, I'll be happier that I tried it and maybe that I failed or it didn't work out or it wasn't for me than if I just sort of said like, maybe not, and just gave it to someone else. It's much better to make the decision in the long run.
I love that. And decisiveness is something very important.
Totally.
in that's also fast moving world. Not making a decision, by the way, I also think is a decision.
100%.
And it's definitely a worse decision than making a bad decision.
Yep.
We, as you know, we have an end routine in the podcast where the previous guest is asking a question for the next guest without knowing who the next guest actually is. And it's a very interesting one. The previous guest asked you, how do you explain Bitcoin to someone who is 80 years or older?
Great one. 80 years or older. I'm going to say what I would say. I'm not really sure it's a great answer though. I would basically say that as we move into a digital age, would you prefer that an option exists that people can transact freely and with some degree of anonymity as an option for people, not as maybe the default money of the world, but that it's important that people have some sort of privacy in an age where everything that you're doing can be surveilled, monitored, and even stopped. And I say that because I think older people, they've lived through tough times. I think they understand the power of not privacy, but like of personal agency, pulling yourself up by the bootstraps, having the freedom to try to make your life better. And and maybe that, I'm thinking out loud here, but that critique could be, okay, like maybe that's a fairly privileged like person who's had a good life or whatever. But I would say even for people like, let's say, an African American who is 80, would you have lived through the civil rights movement? I think, yeah, you would have. So to understand that systems can very quickly turn against you, or that they have been against you historically in the United States, and for a different system to exist, Bitcoin is that system that exists for everyone, regardless of skin color, regardless of race, gender, all of that kind of stuff. So I think it would depend on who I'm talking to, what their background was. But generally speaking, I would ask them, do you think an option like this, freedom money essentially, should exist in a world where everything can be stopped, surveilled, etc.? And then put it on them, like not tell them about the values of it, just see if they find value in something like that existing.
I think it's that's an awesome answer. Honestly, I love that. It's probably also a really good way of orange pilling just people that have gone through things. Those are the people, anyways, who are more prone to Bitcoin. So that's awesome. Thank you so much, Frank, for taking the time out and speaking with you and being on the podcast. Before I let you go, where can people find you, ask you questions, and reach out to you?
Yep. First of all, thank you to you for having me. I listened to so many podcasts when I got into Bitcoin and everything else. So to be a guest on podcasts like yours, especially like yours, which is gaining, an immense amount of new listeners and notoriety, it's truly an honor. I never take this for granted. So thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Where can you find me? X at Frank Corva, Nostr. Try to find me on Nostr. I think you could just type in my name. But I think my NPub used to be in my Twitter handle, but I'll check. But I think if you type in Frank Corva into Primal or any of the main sort of clients, you can find me. I have a Substack that I still write every week. That's just frankcorva.substack. And then you could follow me on Bitcoin Magazine. I publish a few times a week, sometimes on YouTube, sometimes on the website. And otherwise, I think just Googling my name, you'll see a few different ways to get a hold of me.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Frank, for your time. And also thank you so much for everyone that is watching and listening for joining us today. As always, I'll be back tomorrow with another episode. Bye-bye.
Awesome.